our data reference is written, so it's time to register it and test it out. So with my output window visible, I'm going to build my project and copy the path where it got built. We'll need this. Now that we know the path of our assembly, we can use the AF reg plugin utility to register it. So we will change the directory to the PyPC AF directory and use the reg plugin utility. Now there is help available for reg plugin, but we are going to forge ahead and register this data reference on our default AF system. Note that if we do not specify a specific AF server, it's going to go to whatever our system default is. I'll just say register this, and we're going to hope for a whole lot of green, and we got it. So that means our plugin is live. Now I'm expecting in System Explorer to see a plugin lovingly titled Bitmask. But if I look in System Explorer, I don't see that. I see a whole lot of other custom data references that have gotten registered on my system, but I don't see Bitmask. So what I need to do, in fact, is close System Explorer and come back in. That's because the AF SDK does a refresh of data references when it gets instantiated. So System Explorer spun up a copy of the AF SDK, and it checked for what new data references are out there, or new data reference versions. If I made a new and improved version of my data reference and registered it, System Explorer would pick that up. But it was running when I did this, so I need to close System Explorer and come back into it. Alright, so for that pump, if I go into its attributes, and I select all of these guys that I want to be a bitmask, I'll select my data reference as bitmask, and configure them. So let's see, communication failure can take that index bit 0, the controller being offline can be that index bit 1, and the sensor being offline can be the index bit 2. Now keep in mind, this should be from right to left. So I see a 1 and 2 zeros, and I see 1 false and 2 trues. Well, it looks like this almost works. Now, I think we can reasonably guess exactly what happened here, but our next step is going to be that we proceed to debugging, now that we have this successfully registered in our system. Because our data reference isn't behaving exactly as we'd like, looks like our logic is inverted, we're going to debug it. So to do this, we can really latch onto any AF client process, but here, since our AF client process is the PySystem Explorer, we're going to go back into our code and use the Visual Studio Attach to Process feature to debug this. So the process that I will attach to is the AF Explorer process. Now if I wanted to, for example, debug what's going on during a PyOliDB Enterprise call, I would want to make sure that I've got the Show Processes from All Users and Sessions boxes checked, but then I'll have a PyOliDB Enterprise agent process right there, which would be the target of my debugging, if I'm trying to debug my data reference within the context of OliDB Enterprise queries. Right here, we're just working in System Explorer, so we'll latch onto that. And I really want to see what happens when I call a getValue. Why is my result wrong? So I'll set a breakpoint, and in System Explorer, ask to refresh one of these values. Okay, and I'll step through this. I'm hitting F10 to step, and all that's up in the debug menu. So it looks like I've got a good input, just as I'm expecting. Now, of course, my quality character shows up as a 1, and if that is not equal to 0, then I want the quality to be true, Well, it turns out I messed up my logic there, and we need to fix that. Looks like that if I fix that logic, my value is going to be correct, and I'll get the right result returned. So I'll fix my logic to find if this thing is non-zero. I will rebuild the project, re-register the data reference. Again, noting that if I'm working on a kind of complex data reference, I'll add this as a post-build event. And then I'll restart System Explorer to see how this works. Look down in pump 1. Now see how good we are. And sure enough, communication failure. That 0th bit right there is true, false, and false. If I change one of those bits and refresh, then my data references update. So there we have it. Our data reference is working, and it handles that general case of using the parent attribute as the input for what value that we are looking at. Now, the next step will be to go back and look at a couple more advanced features where we can allow different inputs to be used for our data reference. Now that our data reference works for the general case of us wanting the value of our parent attribute, let's expand this so that we can, in fact, point to any attribute relative to our own. Back in our code, we currently derive that input attribute only as our parent attribute. We don't handle the case where someone actually specified some other target attribute to use. So let's fix that. It might be that someone feeds us a target attribute, but if they don't, then that default case that we'll fall back to is just using the parent. So we'll put in a conditional here. Looking at the target attribute name, and if it's empty, then we'll just use the parent attribute. Otherwise, we'll assume that we're supposed to go and look up the AF attribute object relative to our data reference. The AF data reference class provides a method that can do just this. It's called getAttribute, and if we pass it the name of an attribute, again in a syntax relative to our own element here, then that attribute gets resolved for us. We don't have to do any fancy magic. It's already going to be found and resolved relative to this data reference's attribute. So here we can just say that someone passed in the target attribute name, and we will add that to our inputs. Now in real life, we would be crazy not to do a little more error checking here, but for now this will get us going. In fact, that's just about all we need. Once we resolve that attribute and add it as an input, it'll get used just the same within our getValue method. So I'm going to rebuild my project here, and we will re-register it, and I'll go back into PySystem Explorer. I had it closed, I just opened it up, so we should have the new version loaded. Now of course these guys are going to work just about the same, but what if we want to point to an attribute called... Nope, that's good. Other quality. And this other quality has some crazy other value, like a string saying 0. Okay, so we're going to edit the config string now, and make this point to the other quality attribute. Now, when we were first building our tank farm, we looked somewhat at the relative path syntax within PyAF. It works a lot like shell syntax, so if I'm at the level of my communication failure attribute, and I want to go all the way up to its element, dot backslash, and then get the attribute called other quality, I can do that. Again, I'm using a path syntax relative to where I am in space. So I need to go up to the element level and grab the other quality attribute, which is at the root. Let's apply that and see what happens. And sure enough, my value changes to correspond to that other quality. So there we have it. We don't just have the general case of using our parent attribute. We can use this getAttribute function within the data reference to resolve any other attribute relative to our own.